Very good. Well, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I know many of you, if not most of you, from my time as planning director. I was planning director with the county for 6 years prior to becoming deputy county executive about 2 years ago now. And as deputy county executive, I'm fortunate to work with some great agencies. I've got development services and transportation, economic development, parks and recreation, planning, and public works. And so they really work as a team to try to work with the community, our citizens and our business community to plan for the future, develop infrastructure, and be the community that Prince William County, the residents and businesses want us to be. And what that vision looks like, what we want to be, starts with our strategic plan. From the county government's perspective, we have some big picture visions that are out there way into the future, but the strategic plan guides the activities of the county government in 4-year increments. That's really how we measure our progress towards achieving the board's goals. Strategic plan, it has some broad policy areas: well-being, safe and secure community, replacing sort of the public safety and human services functions so to be a little bit broader. And we do some things with culture and recreation, although not a strategic plan goal. It's something that we're very actively working on right now. But what you want to talk about today, of course, is a robust economy. And we talked about the Moonshot. I'm assuming everyone's heard of the Moonshot. It's the board's goal that they adopted in the 2017 strategic plan in January, of changing the dynamic of our tax base. So principally, right now we're heavily dominated by our residential tax base as a percentage of overall real estate valuation, and that percentage right now from a non-residential perspective is about 14%. So about 14% of our tax base comes from non-residential sources when you consider the real estate tax base. The Moonshot that the Strategic Plan Committee came up with, and the committee is appointed by our Board of County Supervisors, citizens and members of industry, is to get that number from 14% to 35%. Okay? So now remember, the strategic plan is a 4-year plan. And so a measure of success is going from 14% to 35%. The board recognized when they adopted that 35%, that's not going to happen in the 4-year time horizon, maybe won't ever happen. And that's why they called it the Moonshot, right? As Supervisor Jenkins sort of called it, that lamppost that you see, and it's guiding your way. And the way we sort of look at it is not necessarily the metric itself, but are we directionally correct? So when we're thinking through our policies, are our policies directionally correct in terms of changing that balance from a residential tax base and moving more towards a higher balance on the non-residential side? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some of our other metrics in the robust economy. So I'm going to go sort of in reverse order and then spend the majority of my time talking about the Moonshot. But Sherman, I should have asked, would you rather people would just ask questions as we go along or take questions at the end?
I think in the interest of time, because we do try to keep it to an hour, if you could ask them at the end, that would be best. Thank you.
So sort of in reverse order, one of the things, and Wade's principally in charge of this, is one of our goals is decrease average county review time for non-residential development. So Wade has a team that he works with, Steve, Dave, Steve, and Mike Garcia, Bill Daff, and there's a lot of good folks on that team, and they work very actively with Wade and the community development team members to make sure that our processes are the best in the business. We try to benchmark ourselves against other jurisdictions. We take a lot of input, and we're always willing to find ways to do things better. Especially on the non-legislative side. If something is already, it doesn't need a rezoning, doesn't need a special use permit, it's a by right use, we want to get people in and out the door as quickly as possible, and we don't know what we don't know, right? So we always appreciate venues like this to hear what we don't know. And again, Wade has assembled a team working with industry to try to give him that feedback, and always trying to make progress on reducing that case processing time. On the legislative side, that's a little more difficult, because when you're talking about rezonings and special use permits, things that need board approval, we have the goal, of course, of decreasing non-residential review times, But the board is also very interested in being transparent and having citizens be able to participate in the development that occurs within their community. So that's the constant balancing act, is to try to provide a good, predictable, and quick review process, but being transparent and providing ample opportunities for people to be able to participate in that process. And again, there's always opportunities to do it better, but I just always want people to know that those are sort of the competing factors. And it's hard to dial that in and get right. There's folks that think it takes way too long, especially if you're the client going through the process. And there's people that think we're constantly ramrodding things through. There wasn't enough opportunity to participate if you're more on the community side of that process. And so we're always engaged with stakeholders to try to make that the best. But that's one that Wade's very, very focused on, is reducing those case review times. And if you have any opportunities, and Steve, I know you participate on that a lot, but opportunities to provide input, Wade's always open for those suggestions. The next one is increase the number of targeted jobs. So the board has adopted targeted industries for Prince William County based on where we have relative strengths in the marketplace, here locally or regionally, principally around workforce or opportunities. So our current targeted industries are around life sciences, IT and cyber, federal contractors, corporate headquarters, advanced logistics and manufacturing. The industries that we have here now, or that are strong, or that we have a labor force that is particularly strong in those skill sets, or we have land resources that are particularly well suited to that. The board last year, and I think that's about 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old now, the board last year commissioned an update to that targeted industry study. I think the consultant probably worked with some of the folks in the room to identify, are we on track? Are those the right industries that we should be going after? The most visible of those industries right now in the marketplace is data centers, a huge amount of data centers, and logistics facilities, a huge amount of interest in advanced logistics, and you just see that with the e-commerce everywhere, that's just a really growing sector. But our targeted industries on point? Is there anything new that we need to add, or anything that we should get rid of? And for the first time, the board asked us to take a geographic look. And so is the west side, this is a pretty big county, is the west side of the county the same as the east side of the county in terms of where the strengths and opportunities or challenges in the marketplace are? So, here at George Mason University, we have very good partnerships with the university on life sciences, for example, or the Virginia Serious Games Institute. On the Ballsford and Wellington Road corridor, there's a huge amount of demand and opportunity for data centers and some of those logistics facilities. On the eastern part of the county, you have Marine Corps Base Quantico and the Northern Virginia Community College and the whole Route 1 and 95 corridor, where we're more focused sort of on the cyber industry. Some of the talents that are coming out of both the Marine Corps and the programs specific to the community college in Woodbridge are oriented around defense, contracting, and cybersecurity. And we've never really taken that geographic look to make sure that we're appropriately focused from a resource perspective. We're going to bring that to the board, I think, in October for the board's consideration. So I really ask that you look out for that. Take a look at the drafts as they come out, and make sure, from industry's perspective, you think we're on the right track with that. And the board, we expect, will adopt something this fall. And it's really important, because that's how that target industry study is how we decide how we're going to allocate our really scarce economic development opportunity funds. So the board, I think, allocates, dependent upon the year, anywhere between $2, $3 to $5 million of a pot of money for economic development opportunities. And those are grants targeted towards bringing industries to Prince William County in those specific sectors. And we want to make sure that we're matching those finite resources, and those resources are dwarfed by a lot of jurisdictions. So we want to really be smart about how we deploy those resources for the best bang for the buck in the industries that make the most sense with Prince William County. On the flip side of that, some of those industries come with a lot of challenges, and so we need to validate. So data centers are wonderful for the tax base, and they don't bring a lot of traffic, and they don't bring a lot of school children, but they chew up a huge amount of land, and they come with transmission lines, right? And we've been through some of that recently. So that's kind of the other piece of the puzzle. Logistics facilities, they chew up a little bit less land, but they're very, very truck and traffic intensive, some of them. So making sure that we're doing hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure, interchanges and road improvements, but we don't want to just chew up that capacity right off the bat. So trying to be smart with that interaction between land use and economic development. So that's kind of where we are in targeted industries. Increasing at-place employment is always a goal of getting more job growth in Prince William County, increasing existing business retention rate, and increasing number of jobs in small businesses. The board this year took a pretty dramatic step and for the first time provided substantial general fund support to Wade Shop and Development Services, really so that Wade can focus on small businesses. And they have a joint partnership with Economic Development and Development Services to sort of roll out the red carpet for small businesses. So I spent a lot of time talking about targeted industries, and if a targeted industry comes in, it's literally what we do. We probably have a red carpet somewhere that we roll out and do business. George probably keeps them in his trunk. Right? And the big guys know how to play the game. They know how to, they'll bring Sherman on board, they'll bring John L on board, and they'll they come in and they know how to navigate the waters, and we have great partners in industry to help folks do that. But what do you do for the small mom and pop that ends up at the Flory Center for some business counseling? They just want to get an LLC, and then they don't even know they need a building permit, and then they operate a business out of the house, and someone calls in and complains about it, right? And so we want to do a much better job of this sort of economic development ecosystem for small businesses, of early identification. If someone calls George or ends up at the Flory Center, to be more proactive about reaching out to them and saying, hey, we understand you got some business counseling. Are you going to do home business? Do you maybe need some kind of permits? We can help you with that, and hold folks' hands through that process a little bit and help them navigate that waters. We don't want to be the jurisdiction that says, that oh, you need a different kind of permit, that's another department. We want to assign someone a project manager up front and sort of walk them around just like we do with the targeted industries. And the targeted industries can pay their own bill. The small mom and pops or the small businesses, it's a pretty hefty bill. So the board has elected to subsidize that to some extent and put our money where our mouth is. If this is an important strategic plan goal to grow small businesses, we want to make sure we've aligned our resources and the services we provide to really help those small businesses, thrive and become real opportunities. So we were very encouraged by that, and Wade and George are working right now to put that program together. The board wants to expand the commercial tax base in redevelopment areas. I think everybody knows that greenfield development in new areas is way easier than redevelopment, especially when you need to assemble properties. You might be dealing with some brownfield issues. You might be dealing with access management issues, and it's a challenge. And the board has a focus on wanting to redevelop certain areas of the Route 1 corridor, the Dale City area, the Yorkshire area, the Sudley Road corridor. And we've done a little bit of work on that over time to try to loosen some regulations or do some facilitated work on the policy side. But the board has become more engaged in that and dedicated some resources specifically for, again, like we have an economic development opportunity fund for economic development in targeted industries, being more proactive with what can we do to facilitate redevelopment. Do we need to get involved in property acquisition? Do we need to create a special fund just for the redevelopment corridors? What does that look like? And I expect in the next budget year you're going to see a lot more focus on redevelopment in some of those targeted areas. We do really, really well in that greenfield development. We can do much, much better in the redevelopment in some of those key areas. And it really makes sense because the taxpayers have invested billions of dollars in infrastructure in those areas already. And that's where people already live, that's where our highways are, that's where VRE is, that's where PRTC provides a huge amount of services. So it's very smart, but it's very hard. It's challenging for the market to be able to deliver that. We've had some private proposals that when you try to go in and they need to acquire 20 different properties to make something happen. One holdout can kill a project. So what do we do, and how can we influence that? So we really want to pay more attention to that. And that brings me to the moonshot, right? So this is the one, it's kind of the one that's dominated. It sort of takes all the air out of all the other discussions. It's what people really focus on because it's such a dramatic shift from where we are today, right? Especially if you think about that as a true 4-year goal. And so the board adopted that in January of 2017. And we held a series of work sessions over the spring and summer of 2017 to sort of get real, right? To talk about what that would take. So if you build out our existing comprehensive plan, and we have way more land planned for non-residential development today than we have for residential development, right? By tens of thousands of acres, way more undeveloped land for non-residential development than for residential development. If you build out the land use plan, you make like 1 or 2 percentage points increase, going from 14 to maybe 15 or 16%, nowhere near the 35%. And building out the land use plan would have way more non-residential development coming online than residential development because of that inventory of land out there that's planned. So from a land use perspective, we're not going to be able to get there unless we do things dramatically different from what we're doing today. And the things we're trying to do today might not achieve that balance either. So we're trying to be more proactive in mixed use developments, for example, where you have integrated walkable mixed use communities with a mix of residential, commercial, and non-residential. Well, any of those mixed use environments that have a residential component by their very nature are going to make that balance less than what it needs to be to make significant progress towards 35%. In addition, imagine a scenario where housing values dramatically increase. That's wonderful for the residents of Prince William County, especially if we're able to drop the tax rate to some extent to equalize for that, and people are able to benefit from the value in their homes. But now we're directionally incorrect. It's a wonderful thing for the people of Prince William County to enjoy benefits from the increase in their homes. And from the strategic plan perspective, that's not a wonderful thing because you could actually go the wrong way on that direction. And I had a conversation with the board a few months ago about Amazon and Halfboard looking for corporate headquarters, and if either one of them were to locate in Prince William County, it would be the biggest get in the history of economic development. The value of the real estate of either one of those campuses is the same as the value of a data center campus, okay? But they come with like 50,000 really high-paying jobs, and those folks need places to live. And so if one of those companies were to pick Prince William County today, our housing values would increase so much that we would take it would be the biggest get in the history of economic development, and we would go in the wrong direction on our non-residential tax base, right? So we really need to think through that a little bit, and that's why when we're talking to the board, and I don't want to minimize the need to diversify the tax base, we definitely need to not be so reliant on the residential tax base. But when we talk about it, again, it's measures that are directionally correct. So, for example, if you look at staff reports that are going to the board, rezoning applications that are going from non-residential to residential, we're being a little more critical with those, not just from looking at the comprehensive plan. So you might have something that's consistent with the comprehensive plan, right? And the comprehensive plan guides our land use, infrastructure, and development. But it might be inconsistent with the strategic plan, and the board's got to weigh that. And so for the first time, we're adding strategic plan considerations to the board staff report that says, you might be fully consistent with your comprehensive plan, and the strategic plan doesn't have the legal weight of your comprehensive plan, but it's something that you should consider. This action may be going in a different direction from where the strategic plan calls for. And we do that when we bring policies before the board. So we had a fairly contentious one recently. It seems like a small issue, but it got fairly contentious. A few years ago, the state changed the stormwater regulations, and it required a lot more land to handle the stormwater for a particular development. And so if you're a small business and you might have needed 1 acre to build your facility, you now needed like 1.3 acres just to accommodate your stormwater. And that 0.3 acres added no value to your property. It might have added esoteric value or value to the stormwater system, but it added no cash value to the overall project. And so some of the projects became financially infeasible because they couldn't get a loan to acquire 30% more property than they otherwise would have needed. And so the board, asked us, to try to work with industry. What could we do to address that? And we have pretty strict issues with regards to buffers and where they are and what's buffered from what. And so we talked to industry and some members of the community to say, well, what if the overall goal is that we accommodate the stormwater regs, but we just give industry more flexibility about where to put stuff on the property. And so then we can maybe get back to, for that 1 acre project now needing 1.3 acres, it goes back to what it always was, needing 1 acre. And we're not giving up on any stormwater, we're not giving up on any open space, we're just being more flexible in where you can put that building on the property. It actually got really contentious. We're doing this as a policy measure to try to be directionally correct to achieve 35% and that other goal of retaining, expanding small businesses. But there were definitely folks in the community that felt like we already don't have enough green space in Prince William County, and I think that's a very valid concern. And we're chipping away at these different things, and so it was a lot of balancing act, a lot of conversations with the community. And it's very hard for the board to choose among those competing priorities, wanting to help advance some of these strategic plan goals, but definitely recognizing that things like open space contribute to the quality of life in Prince William County. And so those are, and sometimes it's not staff that rules the day, it's citizen input and business input, and that's why from both the citizen perspective and from the business perspective, we always encourage, you all know way more about this than we do, and the product is definitely better when we're working together to bring proposals forward. So we definitely appreciate all the time that you spend with us on that, and please continue to do that because it definitely does pay dividends. So the board ultimately did adopt that, and we've had some businesses take advantage of that. But they're tough choices. Even the things that kind of early on seem like low-hanging fruit can be very tough choices. And so if things like that are tough choices, how about the really big decisions, right? How about when it comes to major rezoning cases or major infrastructure decisions that, you have competing priorities. We have schools and transportation and parks and human services. And some of these investments, can be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of investment. How do you choose among those competing priorities? And when you've got goals of robust economy and mobility and well-being and public safety and education and workforce development, how do you choose among those competing priorities? And so that's why it's sort of the message I leave people with. And we're asked more than any other strategic plan goal, we're asked about this 35%. And even the board wrestles with it. Right? The board wrestles with, does 35% just mean real estate taxes? If it's a data center, does the computer and peripheral tax, is it tourism stuff? Is it if we had a meals tax, does that help? If we had, is it anything that isn't paid by homeowners? We've had interesting discussions about, is a sales tax a tax on residents or a tax on businesses, right? Who pays the sales tax? Does the sales tax help us towards 35%? Is it non-residential or residential? And we're continuing those conversations with the board, to make sure that we're where they want to be. But again, I just leave people with the message of, when you see our recommendations going forward to the board and you see the conversations we're having with the board, we're just emphasizing being directionally correct in terms of splitting that pie more towards the non-residential tax base and less towards the residential tax base, and sort of broadening that non-residential base, and not just by a little bit, by a pretty significant bit. So that's really the message I leave folks with, and I know that some of you have expressed concerns to us about sort of the board and staff being all in on this 35%, but we definitely get it. We understand where you're coming from, and be happy to discuss for the remainder of the time today. But it's really the message I just want to leave folks with is participate with us to help us make sure we are directionally correct, help us with messaging, and understand that we get where you're coming from, and we're not going to get to 35% in 4 years or maybe ever, but help us be directionally correct. Really, that's all I got.
That's great. I want to touch on it, we'll go to
Yeah,
you
no,
next, but I just want to touch on a couple of things that you said that I found very interesting. You mentioned the geographic distribution of opportunities, and I think that's something that we've not talked about a lot in Prince William County, and maybe something the Chamber can help with and should be involved in helping with. You all determining what works on the western end, what versus what works on the eastern end. Business retention, I wanted to ask, is do we have any metrics on what the business retention issue is? Do we know any numerically whether that's a problem or how big of a problem it is?
I'll let George answer that.
Okay, well, let's hold off on that for a second. I'll let other people ask questions. And then the final thing that I really appreciated is that you making a point that what we're trying to get to is something that is directionally correct. And perhaps the 35% number is an oversimplification, but we should participate in helping come up with what is the right direction point. Like going to the moon was more than just the number of miles. There's a lot of trajectory issues and rotation and gravity and things I don't understand that were variables also. But I imagine that this economic development issue is going to be like that also. So you had a question first.
I mean, people moving in and getting more housing is just going to be organic because, I mean, people are always moving here. Virginia Tech, they did that study where over the next 20 years, there's going to be another 300,000 people moving in here. So when you look at a development like Piedmont's developed, it's done as far as the residential goes, it's done. Problem is, if you look at it from the space and down at it, there's big spaces in there for commercial. And at the rate they're going now, they're saying it's going to take 10 years to fill the commercial. Well, why the hell don't we just put make it all residential to get some tax money in? You know what I'm saying? I don't know why they don't think about that, but why is it that much more tax money from businesses than it is from several thousand homes?
Yeah, I think the challenge is the school children, right? So we have pretty acute issues across the school system with, and I'm not an expert, right? On overcapacity and overcrowding, right? Overcapacity meaning that the school is designed to serve X number of students, but for a variety of reasons it can't accommodate that number of students, but students are there anyway, and maybe even more. So you have classrooms that are right up to the state limits, and then trailers all over the place. And the school board and our board have some joint goals of trying to eliminate those trailers and make progress on an infrastructure plan, but it's hard to catch up in the environment that we were in 10 years ago. Now we're not growing like we were 10 years ago. Sure. We're at a much, I don't want to say healthier, but I mean it's a more sustainable growth rate right now. And you always want to make sure that growth doesn't outpace your ability to provide services, and we were that way in the past. Growth outpaced our ability to provide services. It's not quite that way right now. But if it's an opportunity to ask those kind of questions, right? Is we don't want to be in that situation again, and the housing comes with having to provide way more services than the non-residential. But people come here to enjoy the quality of life, and if we're going to attract some of the companies that we're talking about, we do need housing products. So it's not an easy equation, and it's something that we're always looking at. But I can tell you the board is pretty crystal clear that we're not anti-residential development, but we definitely need to change that dynamic to be more about mixed-use communities, and especially in places that make sense. Not every place makes sense for a mixed-use community, but we're not even maximizing areas around our VRE stations and our PRTC facilities, and to our greatest extent possible. We need to, we have 52% of the county's land area that's in the rural area. It's 1 unit per 10 acres, and if we're going to create that much land, we need to be way smarter about where we do put it, because growth is going to come. We need to strategically put that density in places where we've got the infrastructure now and in the future to accommodate it. So definitely get what you're saying, but it's that provision of services. The non-residential development comes with way less services that the government has to provide than the residential.
Well, I've seen, as a matter of fact, we in Rossford, I mean, the other day was St. Martin, they're building a big development over there off of Linton Hall Road, but they've worked with the county and are widening the roads, and they got the school numbers that have the trailers there now, but working it out when the schools open up and stuff, there's not gonna be any more trailers. And so they're working with the county, the new developers, and trying to make things better, whether it's bigger roads and more things. So the way they were talking, there's gonna be some less trailers because of some of the things that they're doing and a couple schools that are gonna open up in the future. And so I know that's a good thing, but.
Yeah, we have some developments in the pipeline that are that we're working with, and that's one of them, to try to, identify those impacts and mitigate those impacts. I'm not gonna go into details. We had a legislative change a few years ago that changed that dynamic. We don't really have the ability like we did to some extent, and that's an issue we got to move forward with. But yeah, you're exactly right. We're working with the applicant. That applicant's working with the community on just what you said, to try to talk through those issues and figure out, what are the needs specific to that community, where can they mitigate some impacts so that they are able to contribute to the community.
Okay. Most of the discussion that I've heard about the 35% moonshot has been, it's completely unrealistic, we'll never get there, what are we thinking? It sounds like some of the discussion may be shifting towards, that's not even a good goal to have. And that while we should be going in that direction, we should have a different number, because 35% actually might be very bad for the county. So I'm wondering what's going on to try and figure out what the real optimal number is. What if it's 18%? What if 18% is the one that's really going to get us where we want to go? Well, then find that out and put the plans in place to get to 18%. But if we're trying to put plans in place to get us here, but we really shouldn't go there, then we really might miss the mark of where we need to be.
I agree. I think it starts with everyone having a common understanding of what does 35% mean, right? So we've talked to the board about this several times, and the 35%, as the strategic plan committee envisioned it, is clearly residential taxes, your tax assessment, okay? And for a variety of reasons, that's challenging, as I expressed to you. If it's sort of an all-in non-residential, what do our businesses contribute as a percentage of the tax base versus what do our residences contribute as a percentage of the tax base? So homeowners pay for vehicles and other things, and businesses pay for computers and equipment and B-pole and different. So there's a different mix, and so if you look at the pie as the total revenue generated from residential and the total revenue generated from non-residential, and what's that healthy balance look like, it's a very different conversation than where we're at today, which is just focusing on the residential or non-residential real estate tax bill, right? And so the board is very aware of that, and we're having another discussion with the board, I think next week, a work session with the board, to discuss some robust economy issues, and this will come up on that. And I think the board's coalescing around that, and that's why I keep saying, I don't want to minimize the moonshot, meaning that the board wants to be bold in terms of giving direction to staff to be more oriented towards changing that dynamic, but making sure we're clear about what we're talking about, I think it will be really important conversations now, and we're almost halfway through the strategic plan cycle, and we'll be looking through a new strategic plan. And one of the things we do at the end of every cycle is sort of a postmortem, right? So we have these goals. How do we do on the goals? This is a brand new one, so there'll be a lot of focus on what went right and what went wrong. And I think there'll be a lot of conversation about that. And I really encourage the chamber to be part of that conversation, and I encourage our community to be part of that conversation also, because we're all in this together. We rising tide lifts all boats, and we want to get this right. And I don't know if there is a magic number, but different communities have different contexts where it's appropriate. So places even like Arlington or Alexandria might not be 35%. And think about Prince William County, again, if you've got 52% of your land area that's going to be farms and 10-acre lots, we're not going to build 30 Tysons, to be in somewhere else to be able to make that. And we want to have the rural quality of life and do those things, and we want to be smart about where we have development. And so, what does that look like? So this was our first stab at that. We really in the past talked about jobs and business retention and development review processes and things like that. This was the first sort of shot at talking about changing that dynamic a little bit. And I think it's healthy. I think this conversation is very healthy and beneficial, and I'm glad that the board's oriented towards that. But we as staff and industry leaders and the citizens, I think, owe it to the board to provide the feedback of how should we be looking at this. Appreciate that we're looking at this now, but what does that mix look like, and to make sure we get it right. So this isn't something that's going to live on forever, but it signifies that it's important to the board, but it's an opportunity for staff to be providing this kind of feedback. To here's what we're hearing from industry, and did you consider this, and is this really where we want to be? So again, big picture message is changing that balance, but there is no magic number.
Let me ask a quick follow-up, and then we'll go over here to another question. You almost got to it. You mentioned all-in tax revenue. Do you know what the figure is if you take in all the revenues the county collects?
I don't, but I would suspect it could be in the high 20s, low 30s today. And by the same token of, we don't want the moonshot to be so far out that it's not achievable. One of the board members said, we don't want to stand on a box either and say, well, let's wink and look at it this way. And we're already at 35% and declare victory, So we want to have a goal that's aspirational and really forces us to challenge our business processes on the non-residential side of the house and challenge our tax policies to make sure that we're in place that we need to be. I mentioned that our Economic Development Opportunity Fund is a great tool that we have, but it's not the only tool that we could have. And we're talking to the board about, if you want to be a major player in economic development, what does that look like? What kind of resources does that take? Is it just our targeted industries? Is it tourism? Tourism is very, very important to Northern Virginia, and all the stuff we're doing in tourism, does that count towards, we would probably think it does. It's not really reflected in the 35%. So these are the kind of conversations, we're having with the board. We want to have viable agriculture, agribusiness, rural economy, agritourism. We're doing a lot with craft breweries and distilleries and, and wineries and those kind of things. They contribute much more, right, than they do their real estate tax mix. How do we capture that? That we're growing our non-residential opportunities. And then at the end of the day, some of these things, like I said, if you had wonderful employment opportunities strategically located and all these assets, it's going to increase the value of our housing. Is that a bad thing? We need to own up to the fact that, and we want a variety of product types. Not everybody's going to live in a giant single-family house. So if we want a variety of product types for all, segments of society, what does that look like? So the 35% is oversimplified way of saying do more to help businesses succeed in Prince William County.
Big issue that I see, having lived in a few different places, is the lack of density and reality of building up. And I think our tallest building in Prince William County is on Sudley Road, built in 1930. Whatever it was. However far.
That's right.
What is that balance of, because that is the way you maximize that value, because you go up. So your square footage is compact, you can maintain residential, you can have retail, but what you're doing is you're basically raising the profile. And that's where with the rooftops comes retail, with rooftops comes, what is the structure and balance on that?
So another thing we have to struggle with is, you know, we would love to see more vertical integration of uses, you know, office and retail in the same building as residential. And we have a couple products right now and a couple that are coming out of the ground and will be in the near future. But you're right, that is the tallest building in Prince William County. If we do what you just said, again, that's a wonderful product for the county, but it's going the wrong way toward 35%. So that's why 35% is not the be all and the end all. We still have principles of smart growth and walkable communities and maximizing density in places that make sense. And a lot of that's market driven, right? So we had some projects, for example, the Rivergate project on the Occoquan River, I think was planned to be like, and I might get this wrong, but it was gonna be like 15-story, maybe condos, 15?
Yeah,
I think it was 15.
Yeah, and some parking structure underneath that stuff, but those definitely would have been the tallest buildings in the county, but the market's not there. You know, they were gonna be condos, ownership, and the market wasn't there. So they came in with a new project that, much lower scale, it's 4, 5, 6 stories. You know, but it's the same number of units, right? So same number of units on the same parcel, different, just a different design scale. But it had some design elements that were superior to the condos, meaning it's more oriented to the street. The condos were gated and separated and set back way on the parcel. This is more oriented towards the street, and we were able to negotiate some commuter assistance to get over to the VRE platforms and stuff. So that's why I say it's sort of a give and take. You know, we have principles of smart growth that we would like to see. We have where the market knows it wants to be, and, you know, always trying to match those things up. I do think, you know, tastes are changing, and we're seeing more interest in some of that kind of product. But then every time we think, you know, 3 years ago, it was that, hey, no one's going to buy millennials will never buy single family houses. It's all going to be apartments and small apartments. They're never in their apartments anyway. And as they've started to age out, they're doing the same thing everyone else always did. They're just doing it a few years later than their parents did, right? So every time we think we've got the answer, right, the market proves us wrong. So but you're exactly right, though. We need to be smarter about how we do that density, particularly in the places where we've got the infrastructure. We went through a big exercise within the past couple of years about, we've had long-term plans to take VRE out to Innovation and Gainesville and maybe to Haymarket. And it's you know, hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion proposition, right? So we don't do that lightly. And there was a big challenge of, and we work with the city, and even at Innovation, is the juice worth the squeeze for the number of riders that would come out to just the Innovation station? The amount of residential development that you would have to put there to make it worth its while, and is it worth putting residential development there to induce a transportation choice that you wouldn't have otherwise made?
Well, the other big challenge with that is I keep seeing it over and over, we're exporting our workforce.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the big challenges, and that's my career here. But we export our workforce, and it's frustrating as hell, I'll be honest with you.
It is for us
Okay,
too.
we have 2 questions over here and another over there. Betty, you want to go next?
Sure, and I'm sort of a combination of a question and a comment, but one of the things I do for a living these days is strategic planning, and it was surprising to me, to say the least, when I saw the latest version of the strategic plan, that in the entire plan had one measurable outcome, and it was this 35% goal. My process for how I do strategic planning is I do goals. The goal says where do we want to go, and the objective says how do we know we got there. And so it seems to me that as you're considering how you're going to approach this going forward, the idea of going in the right direction is where we can all embrace. But there are other, what you're calling goals in here, that really are going to be the things that will tell us how, if our overall goal is to say we want to have a more robust and a more vigorous and a successful and an expanded business economy, then some of these other things like in-place employment, and et cetera, and targeting industries by region, those kinds of things are going to help us get there. So it makes sense to me that what we really ought to be doing is looking at metrics that are appropriate for those measures. Right now, according to your plan, we're going to increase in-place employment. We have one extra job at the end of 4 years than we did at the beginning. We've met that objective, and that makes no sense to me.
I think that's a very good point, and we thought the same thing, and so this was the first iteration of the plan that didn't have, not every goal always had the number counting, but most did, a lot did. And so the way we as staff have operationalized that in each of the agency budgets that sort of have a piece of the puzzle here, their annual budget operationalizes how we are going to achieve this goal. So even though the number doesn't appear here, this is a 4-year plan that's implemented through 1 year operating and capital budgets. In the operating and capital budget, we've set those metrics, that this is the number of jobs we expect to achieve and the non-residential case processing time we expect to achieve. If you didn't achieve it, why didn't you achieve it? But I definitely get what you're saying. It's very atypical to not have those in play.
Chris, thanks for coming today. I have a question. You mentioned the east-west, and particularly the question around Quantico. You know, Quantico kind of straddles Stafford and Prince William, and as you know, Stafford doesn't have a depot. You look at where some of those office parks are built. They're built in Stafford, and these are businesses with annual revenue between $2 and $20 million. So they're not gigantic, but they're not real small either. What's your notion of the impact of depot? I've been anti-depot since I moved to the county. And what's your notion and the county, the board's notion of the depot tax?
So the board,
impact on business.
Yeah, I agree. The board has made strategic progress every year on raising that threshold, and it's something that comes up every single budget year. And I don't know how much it actually comes up from our clients, but there's some client bases that are impacted more than others. And so that's one of the things that we're thinking through as we do the new iteration of the targeted industry study and then match it up to the strategic plan goals, is that are we in alignment across all our policies? Land use is the most visible, but it's also our tax policies, our revenue policies. Is everything oriented to help us achieve? So if we were going to get more invested in data centers, you would do X. If you're going to get more invested in small businesses, you would do Y. If you're going to get more invested in defense contractors, small startups, those different kind of things, you'll do Z. And it's sort of an all-in strategy, and we probably focused more on land use than on anything else. And so to your point, a long-winded answer saying yes, we're definitely acutely aware of that, and we're going to start bringing more recommendations to the board about how to line up all of these policies to make sure that we're achieving the outcomes. One of the things that Stafford has that Prince William doesn't have in and around Quantico is vacant land. You know, so we've had some really game-changing proposals in the Triangle area, in Dumfries area of the county, that became non-viable because of what I mentioned, sort of the holdout, you know, the whole holdout property owner. And I mean, huge projects. And we have to solve that. We have to address it, you know, and I don't know what that looks like. But we're studying models around the country where people have cracked this nut and want to bring the board recommendations to say, and we've been talking about this for a long time, we're very successful on greenfield development. If you want to do this thing, it's going to take resources, and this is what that thing looks like. And again, it's the conversation of, is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, you got limited resources, and how do you deploy those? The other thing in the space you're talking about in sort of the cyber and defense contracting is not everybody needs to be in an office building. You know, there's a huge amount of talent out there that's doing stuff in the gig economy that doesn't need a physical space, or if they need a physical space, a shared space is fine. They need space sometimes to meet clients or do some limited business activities. Manassas has a great space to do that kind of stuff, and we're looking at something similar in the eastern part of the county in that corridor, kind of where Quantico is. Because again, to that 35% number, if we had the most successful gig economy in the country where people are deploying their talents at home, developing software and selling that software and selling consulting skills, it wouldn't show up in 35% at all. And that's where the economy's going, right? So that's a point very well taken.
So Monday afternoon, several people in the room attended a presentation here in this room by Scott from GSA. And he was talking about leased space and how Prince William is sitting pretty for the potential to grab some of that leased space that is coming up. He said not just one or two, but several opportunities there. And he said the average lease space of these tenants is 23 years. So I would think that, that would be something that the county would really want to, focus on, is trying to grab some of these opportunities with the federal government.
It is. It's a targeted industry, and that has been. We've hosted Scott also, and taken him on some tours, and had him meet with some board members. And we're really selling that proposition of it is not a smart investment to continue to make everybody drive into the core and then have to spend billions of dollars on infrastructure investment to your point, to deliver people to the core, right? And it's a much smarter investment in the morning, westbound on 66 or southbound on 95, you have your choice of lanes, right? It would be like if you located a major facility, like the FBI facility, but something even maybe more significant. If you located a major facility on the western part of the county or in the eastern part of the county, on southern 95, it would be like the taxpayers giving $1 billion infrastructure subsidy to do that because the infrastructure is there and not utilized at peak hour. And so it was a very illuminating conversation, and we're hopeful that the administration will take us up on that. But it has been a target industry for a long time. I don't want to give away something, but I think it's likely to remain a targeted industry in the future when the board re-ups their targeted industries. And I think they can be a key player, and we are always discouraged. This has happened to us a couple times in my tenure with Prince William County, where even people that are smart growth advocates, like we're a member of COG and some other regional organizations, whenever we have worked with the federal government in the past and developed principles of smart growth that continue to deliver people to the core. We have to decide that we are a polynodal region. We have activity centers all around the region and workforce and talent all around the region. And even for facilities where folks are coming from the Shenandoah Valley, if we could at least cut them off in the Manassas or Gainesville area, that's a huge stretch of infrastructure that they're not taking up all the way into the core. So there's a huge amount of benefits there. They get it, but whether the feds will pull the trigger on that opportunity, I don't know. But we are marketing it in a huge way.
Good
We have
news.
a question over here.
Real quick, I appreciate what the county's doing, and George with business retention and expansion, I think it's critical. Any knowledgeable economist would know about that. But on the business attraction and expansion, there's only so much of the pie to go around. So when you're looking at attracting companies in the U.S. or this region in particular, are you looking at two questions? Are you looking internationally? I haven't heard anything about international attraction or outreach, et cetera. And the second, you mentioned housing, and I, again, understand the commercial tax rate and benefits versus residential. But to attract companies in, you need several things. One is transportation systems in place, which would have helped with Amazon. The other is housing and products of housing. And the third is workforce. So obviously you have a great university and a community college in place, which helps with that. But my questions are twofold. One is international, anything in that realm, and the other is, do you have the appropriate housing pipeline in place? And I know millennials will eventually buy what we bought, but what we've seen statistically is their types of housing is different. And what the younger people are doing is different. So pipeline and international.
Internationally, definitely we have a focus, especially some of the targeted industries. They're not just US based. So by the very nature Some of those target industries, especially when you're in the life sciences field, the pharmaceuticals field, and the IT field, they're very international, and they're really global. And so we definitely have an international focus, mostly on the targeted industry. So the small business is more growing what we have, but definitely on the targeted industry side of the house. You sort of you mentioned and you hit the triumvirate, right? It's the transportation, it's the housing product, and it's the workforce. And when I started my career, it was more about taxes and land value, and then all about the infrastructure, and then recently it's about access to talent and where do the people want to live, where the company wants to locate. And we talk to the board all the time about don't think of economic development as just what George's shop does, but when we're investing in parks or education, those are those quality of life things, especially for an international company, that people look to when they make an investment decision, right? If I need to be attractive to the kind of talent in a competitive workforce environment, and at some point location, we're talking a lot about physical location of businesses, at some point in the not too distant future, the physical location of the business will continue to become less and less relevant as people can deploy their skills wherever they want to. So it's the quality of the communities that the talent wants to move to. So those infrastructure decisions we make and the housing choice decisions, and you're right, things are a little bit different. We did a study a few years ago about our housing stock, in terms of are we appropriately situated to where the market would otherwise want us to be. And it showed that we had an acute shortage for very low income housing, and then pretty good through the rest of the stratum, but also an acute shortage for what they would call executive level housing. So the person that's going to make the decision about the business location decision and wants to make that decision based on where am I going to live, which is a decision-making factor, we don't have a lot of product in that space.
Rarely do I hear that, so I'm glad, because most people look at affordable housing, which is critical and very important, but from a traction perspective, that executive housing needs to be in place as well.
This has been a great conversation. It's very informative. One of the ways that I'll warn you, one of the ways that we get people to come to this meeting is we promise them that it will only be an hour commitment. So, at the risk of losing people, I want to give you an opportunity to give a sort of a summary comment, and then I know Ross normally has some things that he wants to let us know about that are coming up on his list. So do you have any words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
I would just say, continue to participate in the process. We too are struggling with, our principles of smart growth and where we want to be versus, some of the metrics that we've adopted, and stay engaged. The board is very interested to hear from all quarters of the community about how to make this Prince William a community of choice. And like I said, our citizens and our business community know way better than we do of what that's going to take. So I appreciate this opportunity to engage with you today, but that's the message I would leave you with, is just stay engaged. Please, invite us out anytime you'd like to talk about this. Come to our public hearings. Participate on committees that we have, and I know that time's a very valuable resource, but it does make a difference. The board definitely does listen. And just thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.